Race to the Red Sea. China, Israel, UAE and the US are just a few of the countries building or already have bases in the region. Now Turkey is the latest to that group. So why the growing interest in the Red Sea? This is Inside Story. Welcome to the program. I'm Hashim Al-Barra. The Red Sea has long been one of the world's most important trading routes. It's a vital link between Asia, Africa, the Middle East and into Europe. Everything from oil to food and naval vessels pass through it, and countries including Saudi Arabia, Sudan, Yemen and Egypt all border it. But in recent years, several states have been increasing their presence in the Red Sea. The latest is Turkey. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan recently traveled to Sudan to sign deals worth $650 million with Sudanese leader Omar al-Bashir. This effectively gives Turkey a unique foothold in this increasingly important and competitive waterway. Part of the deal will see Turkey rebuild the Sudanese port city on Suwakin Island on the Red Sea. It was once controlled by the Ottoman Empire but has been abandoned over the past century. Turkey plans to build a dock there which will be used not only by civilian vessels but also its military. The Turkish president says the point of all this is to develop tourism and create a transit point for pilgrims crossing the Red Sea to Mecca. Sudan says the deal with Turkey does not harm the security of Arab countries. But here's why some are concerned. This is Suwakin Island. It's on Sudan's eastern coast and will give Turkey direct access to the Red Sea. Now, if we take a wider look at the region, you can see the other players in the area. Saudi Arabia lies directly to the west. Its Western naval fleet has a base on the coast of Jeddah. And here is Yemen. That's where the United Arab Emirates has set up numerous ports along the coast. Egypt has the largest naval fleet in the Middle East and Africa, and it has 4 bases on the Red Sea alone. And here's where it gets complicated and crowded. A host of foreign forces also have either bases or security patrol presence here, including the US, China, the UK, Russia and Iran. Let's bring in our guests in Istanbul. Metin Goshan, security analyst and former military officer. In Brussels, James Moran, Associate Senior Research Fellow at the Centre for European Policy Studies and former Principal Advisor on the Middle East and North Africa at the EU's External Action Service. And joining us from London, Mamoun Abu Nawar, a military analyst and retired Jordanian Air Force General. Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Let me start by asking Mr. Goshan this. Mr. Goshan, the Suwakin deal signed between the Turkish government and the Sudanese government, is this part of Turkey stepping up its Africa engagement, or there's more to this story?
I think first I have to say that the ruling Ek Party, since coming to the office in 2002, the ruling Ek Party has a very ambitious Africa vision. So in this right now at this point, we see a new opening of a new folder in this Africa vision. The definition, I think what happened in Sudan is, I think Turkey, Ankara, has been trying to establish a forward military base in that strategic island for the achievement of 4 objectives. First one is security capacity building in the host state of Sudan. So helping Sudanese military, force projection surely. But against whom? This is the question I think we should answer. Against whom this force protection?
So you're talking about 3 main elements: humanitarian, security and cooperation with the Sudanese government. Mr. Moran, this is something that gives the Turkish government a foothold in an extremely important area in the world. So how significant is this development?
We'll have to see. There are, of course, many others who in the last couple of years have upgraded their presence in the area. We have to remember that China has opened its very first overseas facility anywhere in the world in Djibouti, very close by. We see that various developments in Assab, the Eritrean port there, which has been given giving harbor to Iranians and others. The whole area in the last 2 or 3 years has been subject to a raising up of military presence and so forth in the Red Sea. And this is very, very significant because, of course, remember, especially from the European point of view, the vast majority of our trade, the EU trade with Asia, is passing through the Red Sea, through the Suez Canal and through the Bab al-Mandab, straight at the southern end of the sea. This has always been a key consideration, perhaps the key consideration for everyone, that this trade is not disrupted by what is going on in the various conflicts around the area.
Mr. Abu Nawar, this comes at a very critical moment for the region. We've seen the media in Egypt very critical of the deal between Turkey and Sudan. Is this something which is likely to further strain relations between Turkey on one hand, the UAE and Saudi Arabia on the other hand?
It is very strategic and hot area, this area, and a very critical choke for the whole world, and it should be secured and free passage for all trade, etc. Having said that, presence is important for so many countries in the world to be there on that Red area and Red Sea area. The Houthi, I think, the Yemeni crisis reflect that on the Red Sea. Terrorism also is an important factor concerning that matter on that area. So we see the Houthi now crisis with the missile thing and hitting some of the ship and vessels on that area. It's really made the U.S. alarmed by that and sending some ships, vessels, etc., to secure the border there. Concerning the Saudi and UAE, yeah, they're trying to get some in Djibouti and then even in Yemen itself, some of the seaport is trying to get that because of that strategic location over there. But having said that, even in Israel, it's very important for Israel. Even Jordan, it's the only exit route to the sea, and that's why it's very important for the whole country.
Let's say with
that region.
Okay, let me go to back to Mr. Goshan. Let's say with the regional implication. So Turkey has had very strained relations with Saudi Arabia and the UAE over the GCC crisis. They set up a military base here in Qatar. Now they're setting up a new military base in Sudan. Isn't this which is likely to further raise the anxiety of the Saudis and the Emiratis?
Yes, as you have emphasized, right now Turkey has 3 military bases, permanent military bases. First one is in Qatar. And in 2018, Turkey has been planning to increase the military base in Qatar up to 3,000 soldiers as a sort of brigade level, military base. And also in Somalia, we have Turkey has a big military facility providing military education and training to the Somalians, Somalian military. And right now in Sudan. So we have a triangle here. And this triangle and this force projection attempts against whom? I think right now, we, as you have said, Saudi-led, Gulf bloc is against Turkey, and Turkey, particularly in Eastern Mediterranean, we have a very, very getting increasingly visible rivalry between Turkey and Greek Cyprus, Greece, Israel, and Egypt bloc over the hydrocarbon reserves in Eastern Mediterranean. So Ankara has been feeling itself, I think, under pressure. And to go beyond, to get through that pressure, Ankara has been defining this military move, I will say, yeah, that's right, as a sort of leverage to use against this bloc to diffuse the existing tension.
Mr. Moranas.
And also, let me say this last point, sir.
Sure.
This is a bilateral, yes.
Go ahead, briefly, please.
This last point is extremely important. What we are here talking about is not an regional alliance building effort. What we are talking here is an bilateral military cooperation between two countries. So this issue of bilateral military cooperation comes with a package of risk that Ankara has to delicately manage.
We will talk about the challenges ahead. Mr. Moran, you served as Principal Advisor on the Middle East and North Africa at the EU's External Action Service. You've served in many countries in the region. The reason why I would like to focus a little bit more on the regional implications, because let's just look at what's been happening over the last few months. Egypt hands over the sovereignty of two main islands on the Red Sea, Sana'a and Tiran, to Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia decides to build a mega city on the Red Sea. United Arab Emirates acquires more naval bases in Eritrea, Somalia, and also in Yemen. Now the Turks step in. Isn't this likely to further raise the concerns about how to move forward in one of the most important and extremely volatile areas in the world?
I'm not sure those particular developments will necessarily raise the tension. The tension's already very, very high. The main worry at the moment in terms of maritime security in the region must be the conflict in Yemen. We've already seen, and one of your other speakers has mentioned, we've already seen some attacks on shipping and military and one or two commercials as well a year or so ago. Should desperation set in, certainly if there should be an attack on the port of Hodeidah anytime soon, we can expect perhaps more of that to come. That, I think, is the number one issue at the moment, and how best to solve that. Well, of course, the best way to solve it is to try to get a political path forward on the conflict in Yemen. For the EU's point of view, of course, we fully support the efforts of the UN Special Envoy. We also contribute through the European Union to Operation Atalanta, which is still going on. It was originally set up to fight piracy, of course, in the Gulf of Aden, but it's in the area, and it's got a mandate at least until the end of 2018. And we are very concerned about that. All of these other developments taking place are significant in such a sensitive area, and everybody will be watching everybody else. But I think the conflict in Yemen has got to be top of the agenda. And related to that, isn't it about time that the countries, the littoral countries of the Red Sea, together with everyone else with an interest in the area, comes together to try to improve somehow the regional coordination between the different military services, security services, and indeed the commercial interests, so that we can have a more stable picture going forward, because this is an absolutely vital seaway, which is going to be for certainly for the rest of this century at least.
Mr. Abu Nawar, on the Yemeni issue, Saudi Arabia has been accusing Iran of using the Houthis as proxies to further destabilize the region and control strategic ports in Yemen. Isn't this something that could add to the confrontation which is underway between the Saudis and Yemenis, between the Saudis and the Iranians in the region?
It is. It's an extension of conflict between Saudi and Iran in Yemen, and it's going to stay like this. But I think with the Houthi launching missile over Riyadh, etc., we might see some interference from regional, and they need to freeze that conflict in actual fact. Get the food, medicine to these people. I mean, it's a catastrophe what's happening in Yemen. And I think the conflict might stay on for a while, but they need to freeze that conflict and get together a new state structure for Yemen, a new election, and etc. But it will take a while. But as your previous speaker said, this is a very hot area, everybody, and full of activity, military, commercial, and etc. And Yemeni crisis will impact. What scares me is if they mind it or they start using the suicide boat, small boat, they're very agile, these tactics, or using missile hitting these ships. So we might have some reflection on that.
Okay.
And the Yemeni crisis, as I said,
it is one of the top priorities now for the international community. Mr. Gulshan, the Africa is quite obvious now that it's becoming central to the Turkey's global expansion strategy. But this is something that could come at a cost, because, I mean, for you to be able to maintain footholds in different parts of Africa, particularly the Red Sea, you need to spend more on infrastructure programs. Can Turkey afford that at a time when its economy has been facing a crisis?
Yes, I mean, this is a question directly related to hyphens between Ankara's intention, its rhetoric, and its capacity, you know, and we see a sort of widening gap between Ankara's rhetoric and its capacity. But right now, I would say that considering Turkish military's, you know, current posture, particularly the Navy's current posture, I think Ankara can do that. But at the moment, but can Ankara maintain this in a sustainable fashion? I think this is the question that we have to ask. And also, let me say this domestic socio-political side of the story, which is, I think, extremely relevant when explaining Ankara's recent move of forward military basing in Sudan. Right now, in 2018 will be an election year, Ankara, in Turkey, and the emotional reality in Turkey, the things that you think is not relevant right now, the things that how you feel in Turkey is extremely important. So for the decision makers, they need a nationalist and, you know, to some extent, populist discourse. So the Turkish people, you know, they know and they recognize this sort of military moves abroad as a part of embodiment of the national pride. So it's a good point for domestic political consumption. The second issue, civil-military relations in Turkey. Right now, we have some tensions between the military and the civilian elites after the July 15, 2016 coup attempt. And these sort of moves, you know, the creation or establishing a military base abroad is a good point to diffuse the existing tension between the military elites and civilian elites. So this provides a room for cooperation for the civilian and military elites, which is good for Ankara. And the last issue is operational military technology side of the story. Turkish military, particularly Navy, has been trying to improve its capabilities in the fields of naval aviation, and also Marines. So Turkey has been planning to procure a light aircraft carrier. So Turkey has been trying to give more agency to the Navy for the global force projection. So Africa is an important area for Turkey's navies to concentrate more in 2020s.
Mr. Moran, Russia has also expressed a desire to set up a military base in Sudan. I mean, this desire expressed by the Russians, the presence of the Chinese in places like Djibouti, Djibouti is an interesting case where it has a French naval military base, an American military base, and also a Chinese naval military base. This interest in Red Sea, is it because of its geostrategic importance, shipping oil route, or it gives any key player major stakes in major issues, including the Middle East and also the oil shipping route?
Yes, I think it varies a little bit. But remember, for China, that route is not important for oil and gas. It goes out through the Strait of Hormuz the other way. But it is very, very important, as I said earlier, for Chinese trade with Europe, which is huge. We're talking 600-700 billion euros a year in trade two-way between China and the European Union countries, plus other countries in Europe not members of the Union. And it's evident that China would have a very strong interest in doing all it can to project more stability into the region. And I think the experience in dealing with the Chinese that the EU has had, notably, as I mentioned earlier, with the Operation Atalanta against piracy off the Somali coast, has been pretty positive. That interest is one thing. The interest of others it varies. I mean, for France, obviously, there are big interests in terms of its operations in Africa and the Horn of Africa, apart from its role as a key European Union member state. So the interests do vary quite a bit. And it's not surprising that people will want to do all they can to protect their interests. The difficulty is when these interests are not properly coordinated. And that's the point that I made earlier, that there doesn't seem to be at the moment any real effort to improve international coordination over management of the area. The Egyptians, in fact, I think about a couple of weeks ago, made an announcement that they would like to see that. I'm not sure that's the answer, but that's certainly the direction that, direction of travel. travel that one would like to see more of.
Mr. Abu Nawar, I mean, we're talking about a galaxy of countries with different agendas operating in the area. Is there any concern that this could lead to a backlash or a confrontation between key players looking for a bigger say in the Red Sea area?
It's full of war, that area, and I don't think coordination aspect would work out in the future. That's the only area where conflict will stay for a while. Hopefully they will get some coordination. Look, you got a conflict between the Arabs, and you got Arab state and the Horn of Africa, some of the Horn African country. You got also the Yemenis crisis. You go up, also you have some problems. So that area will stay hot for a while. I don't think, and every country pursue its interest. The flow of oil is very important for the whole world. If the Strait of Bab el-Mandeb being blocked for any reason or being delayed, that will shoot up the oil prices, etc. So this area is very hot, but the main thing I think everybody should concern of is keeping the Strait of Bab el-Mandeb open, free of all way to the sea, Indian Ocean and Pacific and to the Mediterranean. So this thing, this should be, I mean, a concession about it from the whole country on that part of the world.
Mr. Gorshan, briefly, please. What's the danger of an overreach for Turkey in Africa and Red Sea?
For almost a year, what we see in the Turkish foreign policy is a shift from old-fashioned diplomatic, civilian designed foreign policy to a more muscular, more economy-centric foreign policy, which I define as moral realism. In this moral realism, we see a combination of usage of or promotion of hard power, military capabilities, push for economic cooperation, humanitarian purposes, and historical, cultural, and religious values. So we see a sort of combination of these four components in this new paradigm, I would say, the moral realism. So in this new paradigm, the issue or the question that should be asked is the question that you ask, in fact, the capacity side of the story. And can Ankara maintain this in a sustainable fashion? But right now, Ankara has been feeling itself in a pressure, as I said before. And with these sort of moves, new openings like the one that we witnessed in Sudan, Ankara has been trying to increase its leverage when sitting on the strategic bargaining tables or negotiation tables with the regional players like Egypt, Israel, or Iran, and also with system-level players like USA and Russia. So Ankara is reacting to this existing pressure by with this sort of moves.
Mr. Moran, key players with different agendas, huge stakes there, talking about Al-Shabaab, we're talking about piracy, we're talking about regional conflicts, we're talking about Yemen, Eritrea, and Djibouti. You said that there needs to be this call to bring about all those countries to sign a pact about how to manage and to make this is one of the Red Sea, one of the safest areas in the world. How can they come together, set aside their regional and international agendas and agree on a pact to manage the Red Sea?
That's not something that's going to happen overnight. And if ever it were to happen, it would probably take many, many years. Doesn't mean to say it shouldn't be tried, but you have to get your ducks in a row. And the duck that is at the head of the row at the moment it must be the conflict in Yemen. Surely, if we can see more effort being put in, and I here again go back to the UN efforts there to try to get a political path forward for a solution in Yemen, if there can be a little bit more commitment on the part of the main players to those efforts, perhaps that could be a starting point for better coordination in the wider region. We're not there yet, and clearly the conflict in Yemen at the moment is going through a very worrying stage, and I think the suffering of the Yemeni people is something we all feel with. There's no question about that. One of the worst humanitarian crises at the moment that we can see. But that has got to be the issue before the international community and the states party to that conflict right now. And surely the best way forward, it seems to me, would be to put a little bit more energy, a little bit more effort into the efforts of coordination that are currently being tried by Sheikh Ismail and so forth in the United Nations. That could provide a starting point for better coordination for the future.
Metin Gulshan, James Moran, Mamoun Abu Nawa, thank you very much indeed for your contribution. And thank you too for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. For further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Hashim Ahlbara, and the whole team here. Bye for now.